Hi everyone, welcome to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel, promoting mindful communication, growth through conflict. So today's video is the first in what I think will be a series of a few videos about sayings or poems or kind of quotes from people about conflict and what their significance has been for me. And I want to kind of share what my thoughts are about them, just to see whether they kind of resonate with you or whether you interpret them differently, etc. But I want to just kind of share them because I think a lot of them have quite a lot that could contribute to situations where there is conflict about different things, and an opportunity to step back and be what I call mindful about how we communicate and respond in relation to conflict. So today's quote is it's a translation which I found in The Way of Zen, a book by Alan Watts. So it's, as I say, it's a translation, so there may be other versions of it that you might find, but it's from a text called the Hsin-hsin Ming, I hope I'm saying that correctly, by Seng-ts'an. As I say, it's quoted in The Way of Zen by Alan Watts, which is a book that I personally found quite kind of inspiring, stimulating, certainly thought-provoking when I was about 18 years old. And I think this particular quote, I don't know if it meant that it led to me becoming a mediator, but it certainly started me thinking about the idea of conflict and the ways in which we respond to conflict. And so I'm pretty sure that even if it didn't at that time inspire me with the idea of becoming a mediator, I think later on when I did become a mediator, quite a few years later, it was certainly one that I went back to and always kind of had in mind in relation to how we look at and respond to conflict. So I'll read it through and for you to hear, to consider how you would interpret it, and then I'll go through kind of different aspects of it and try to identify how I would see it as relating to conflict resolution, particularly through the lens of the mediation and conflict coaching work that I have done for the last 25 years, but also through my own personal experiences in terms of how to deal with conflict. So here we go. Hsin-hsin Ming, translated by Seng-ts'an, quoted in The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. So, the perfect way is without difficulty, save that it avoids picking and choosing. Only when you stop liking and disliking will all be clearly understood. A split hair's difference and heaven and earth are set apart. If you want to get the plain truth, be not concerned with right and wrong. The conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. Now, when I first read that, I had this kind of sense of peace come over me, and it's kind of hard. I'm going to try to put into words why that is, but certainly I kind of had this kind of sense of peace, and I think it was because it enabled me to stand back from perhaps my own experiences of conflict when I read it, but also conflicts that I saw going on between other people, whether kind of immediate friends and family or kind of in the world in general. But the idea is particularly the last two lines of that quote, but in a sense the whole quote has relevance, but particularly the last two lines, the conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. And I suppose what it led me to realise is that actually quite often the difficulties we have about a lot of situations is not necessarily the situation itself, it's the perspective that we hold about it and our need to kind of prove ourselves to be right and other views about it to be wrong. And in a sense that's immediately where the difficulties start, because what that then means is that we tend to get involved in battles with other people to try to get them to change their view to be the same as ours. And in a way, all the time we're doing that, we're not actually then dealing with the issue of conflict itself. It's our perspective on it. And we're trying to get other people to see things the same way as we do, and often in return, obviously, they're trying to do the same thing to us. So we get involved in this battle where we're trying to say, I'm right and you're wrong, as opposed to I'm right from my perspective and that's fine, and you can be right from your perspective, and I don't have to destroy you or destroy your presentation of your view as a necessary thing to ensure that I'm right absolutely. So it's to me, it's the difference between acknowledging that there's many perspectives on a different situation, and that if we focus, instead of accepting that people have different perspectives on a given situation, instead of trying to force them to come to our perspective, we can accept that they have a different perspective. And if that means that they're doing certain things which we then kind of how can I put it, kind of crash into each other over, or that affect us, then we can look at how we can accommodate that we have different perspectives in order to move forward. And for me, there are all sorts of things that come out in mediation in relation to this. So, for example, often mediation is suggested to be a process which supports people in moving towards agreement. Now, I quite strongly disagree with that. I disagree with that idea that it's about agreement. I don't see it that way, because quite often what people achieve through mediation, particularly if there's not a kind of a pressure or agenda to get them to agree, what they come to is actually a respectful and often quite creative acceptance of the other person, and recognition that they can disagree respectfully and creatively. So the idea that they have to agree suggests there's got to be a right way of seeing it, which is the agreed way of seeing it, as distinct from a wrong way of seeing it. And so that often means that some people, when they think that mediation is about agreement, they don't want to try it, because they think that somehow they're going to be forced to change their view. They're going to be forced to give up their view. They're going to have to, what's sometimes called compromise. And there are different ways in which people understand compromise, but sometimes people think compromise is kind of like basically just being wishy-washy and giving in, and not getting what they want at the end. But actually, often what happens in mediation, again, as I say, as long as there isn't this agenda from the mediator to try to get people to agree as if that's the only outcome that's allowed, often what people do in mediation is they actually come together and discuss why it's been a problem, why the things that have happened have been a problem for each other, and hear each other's perspectives on things, because the mediation process ensures that people get a chance to hear the other person's perspective or each other's perspectives, and then work out a way in which they can move forward even if they still hold the same view about things. So it's about acknowledging that two people hold the same view and can move forward in ways which have created a possibility for that to happen, instead of it being that they devote all their energy to defeating the other person, to making them wrong and themselves right. Because as it says in the poem, the conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. That's where the difficulty arises, is we think that we've got to get other people to see things the way we do. Now, there's so many things that come from that, from this kind of acknowledgement that the conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. If I can have a view about something, but then come to an acceptance that you have a different view about it, and that I've done my best to try to understand that different view, rather than destroy it, dismiss it, say you must be wrong, you must be stupid, you must be crazy to hold that view, but I actually listen to your perspective. I see, perhaps I can maybe come to an understanding as to why it might be that you hold that perspective, etc. So I've been open to acknowledging that you have a different view without dismissing it or trying to destroy it. If I can come to see that I can do that about somebody else's perspective, it means that I can see that actually I don't need to have somebody else's approval for my perspective. Because if I can accept that another person has a different view to me, then in a sense, whether they hold the same acceptance of my view or not, I can see that it's possible to do so. So then I don't feel that my view is under threat anymore, because I see that actually it is possible to see another person's point of view. It's possible to. It doesn't mean to say other people are going to, but it's possible to see that another person's point of view has validity from their position, their perspective, their kind of position around the circle of looking in on a situation. And when that happens, it's quite an amazing, or on a personal level, it's quite an amazing experience, because it means that I kind of don't have to need to force the other person to be wrong, and I don't have to need to force the other person to see it my way. They either do or they don't. Because if I can see that they have a different view, then it shows that it is kind of, in a sense, possible, humanly possible to do that. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy to come to that place, because there'll be lots of things that we want to hold on to, that we want to defend against other people challenging our views. We might get very upset that they don't agree with us, or they kind of criticize us for holding the view that we do. So it's not as if we can just flick a switch and do this. But for me, when I have ever been able to do this, and in a sense what I've seen in other people being able to do this in front of me in mediations, or even sometimes in conflict coaching, where it's just a one-to-one discussion between me and another person about how they come to a kind of recognition or acceptance of the other person's perspective, even though it's been very painful for them in the lead up to that point. It is about seeing that the conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. It is where we have to be right, and not only do we have to be right, the other person has to be wrong. So it's an absolute rightness that we're fighting for, that no other perspective is allowed, because I'm right and you are wrong. And the idea that I have that kind of control is where the sickness arises, because I can't control how you see things. And in mediation, what people come to recognize is they can't control how the other person sees things. But what they can do is not feel they've got to let go of their own perspective. So there's less threat involved when we see that what's right for me, or what my perspective is, whether I see it as right or not, what's right for me is fine. And I can hold that perspective, and I can then also accept that you have a different perspective without having to destroy you. And as we know, sometimes that need to destroy the other person's point of view can even go so far as to kill that person, in the belief that somehow we're going to get rid of that point of view by killing people. But obviously it's kind of missing the point to do that, because it's the perspective that matters, not the person who happens at the time to be the one who sees it that way. Now, obviously some people might say, well, that's crazy, because, if someone goes around killing other people, then we can't say that that's right. We have to say that that's wrong. Well, this is where it becomes challenging, because I can't know what's going on in the mind of a person who kills another person. For them at the time of doing it, almost intrinsically there has to have been a reason why they did it. So in that moment it was right for them to do that. Doesn't mean to say it would have been right for me, so I'm still not letting go of my own perspective on it. But I have to accept that for whatever reason in the moment of doing that thing, it was right for them. Now, again, that might sound quite shocking, but in many situations, if you think about it, if you look at war, if you look at battles with groups that are called terrorists, we could really go quite deep into that. At times in the past, Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist, but very few people would call him that today. But his involvement with groups that were involved in killing other people meant that some people said that he therefore is wrong, bad, etc. But many could come to understand in time what meant that people did those things. Now, at the end of the day, perhaps we can never justify killing, but we can understand that there are perspectives that felt at the time that that was the only place they could go to with their situation. I'm very aware of other people who are working with situations where there's been extreme actions have occurred, which could include murder or some kind of serious assault. And they've actually come together with the people that have carried out those things to try to understand what led to them seeing that that was the only way forward. So instead of completely dismissing that person and seeing them as wrong, they've sought to understand their perspective. So they've not got involved in the sickness of the mind, which is the conflict between right and wrong. It's about, in a sense, not having to give things those labels of right and wrong, and coming to see that actually that they're just different. And we can say, no, we've got to say things are wrong. But the point is, does it actually change anything for us to label it as wrong? Does it actually mean things move forward more effectively? Because when we say things are wrong, we tend not to have any openness to hearing what's behind the perspective. We just dismiss it. And that inevitably means that the problem keeps reoccurring because we've not learned anything about the perspective such that we can take it into account in carrying forward our own actions and carrying forward our own beliefs. So therefore, if we only see something as wrong, it means that we're, in a sense, denying ourselves our own opportunity to create a better way forward, even given that the other person sees things differently to us. So I'll let that one kind of settle, and I'd be fascinated to know if you have different views about this, or if you have objections to what I'm saying, or if it resonates with you in some way. But I want to also just look at a little bit more of what the poem itself says. The perfect way is without difficulty, save that it avoids picking and choosing. Only when you stop liking and disliking will all be clearly understood. A split hair's difference and heaven and earth are set apart. So I think one of the things that can sometimes happen when those kind of Zen, and in other occasions Taoist, and from most kind of spiritual kind of perspectives on things, they can sound like they're just asking for something which is a bit unrealistic, fantasy, just kind of airy-fairy kind of stuff. The perfect way is without difficulty, save that it avoids picking and choosing. Only when you stop liking and disliking will all be clearly understood. As if we've got to come to this place where we don't have an opinion about things, as if we don't have a perspective. And I would see this as saying something a little bit different to that kind of place of where somehow you just don't have opinions, you don't have beliefs, you don't have preferences, etc. It's about acknowledging that we all do and always will, but it's about acknowledging that there is no absoluteness about it, there's no objectivity about it, there's no one answer about it. That it is that, okay, I might prefer, I might prefer strawberries to bananas. I don't actually, I like both, but, I might prefer one thing to another. But I can just go with the fact that I like, if I did, could just go with the fact that I like strawberries. I don't have to dislike bananas. I don't have to say, oh no, strawberries are better than bananas. I can just say, I like strawberries. And that's it. I don't have to dislike something as contrast, as if I need to justify why I prefer strawberries, why I choose this rather than that. I can just choose this. I don't have to say there's something wrong with the other option that I'm considering. I can just choose the one that feels right for me. So in a sense, I don't have to dislike. It's a bit like with the sickness of the mind being the conflict between right and wrong. I can have right for me, but I don't have to, in contrast, prove that something else is wrong. I don't have to like this and say that therefore it's because I dislike something else. Because quite often that can be the challenge, is that we almost expect people to prove why they choose to take a certain action or hold a certain belief. They've got to justify it to us, or we might feel we've got to justify it to ourselves. But sometimes, or often, and I think what this poem is saying, always, ideally, but I don't think that we're ever likely to achieve that, but we can acknowledge that all the time we think we've got to justify why we like a certain thing, or that we hold a certain perspective. It's as if we're setting ourselves up into battle straight away. We can't just like the thing or feel that it's right for us. We've got to prove that there's a contrast which is wrong and bad and that we dislike. In contrast to it, we can't, in a sense, just follow our own path. It's as if we feel we need to set it against something else. So we're intrinsically, again, creating this sickness of the mind by doing it that way, by thinking that we have to always justify, prove our rightness, and in contrast demonize something that's different to ourselves. But actually we don't have to do that. We'll often have more peace when we just make a decision and we don't look to justify it to ourselves or to other people. We don't need others' approval. We just do it because it just comes to us to do that thing in the moment and it feels right. And there's no challenge to us of doing so from what we perceive as coming from others. And it may be that others think they're challenging our decisions and choices, but again, in a sense, that's kind of for them to deal with. You know, what they're choosing to do is to challenge us. Well, that's up to them, and they can do that. No, I'm not saying this is easy. I just mean this is why, to me, reading this poem when I did gave me this kind of sense of peace, because it told me I can kind of step out of this battle. At times I can step out of the battle. Whether I always manage to is another question, but it is possible to step out of this battle that we might find ourselves in with other people sometimes and just think, okay, they have a different view to me. I don't need to destroy their view in order for me to feel right about my view, to feel at ease about my view, to like my view. I don't have to dislike their view. I can just not have to have an opinion at all, because why would I? If it's not my view in the first place, why do I have to have a judgment about their view? Why do I have to say that I dislike bananas? Why not just say I like strawberries and leave it at that? I don't have to have a view about bananas in contrast. If someone offers me, I'm using bananas and strawberries as the examples, but it could be anything. If someone offers me something and I choose a choice between two things and I choose one, I don't have to say, I'm choosing this because I don't like that one. I can just choose the one that I like, and that's it. And if the other person wants me to justify it to them, in a sense, I justify it by saying, I like this one. And even if they said, well, why don't you like the other one? I could still say, because I like this one. I don't have to dislike the other one in contrast. So I can just follow my choices, and I can just be at ease that is my choice, without having to feel I need to justify it, even against the questioning of other people. Now, as I say, this is kind of in the place where it feels peaceful and I can come to that recognition of things, but it doesn't mean to say it's easy to do every day. It's not easy to do in our difficult situations, but I think for me, the beauty of this poem and what it gave to me, and as I say, what I see happen between people when I'm providing mediation for them, is this movement from feeling it's got to be that you're wrong and I'm right, to just, okay, I'm right for me, and I accept that you have a different perspective, but I no longer need to destroy your perspective. I can accept that you have a different view, and that's for you to choose. And even if you want to try to destroy my perspective, I don't have to do that in return to you. And in some other videos that I've done, I talk about the idea of a competitive approach to conflict, and how it cannot in itself ever lead to resolution, because our focus is on this need to destroy the other person. It's like a tennis match. You hit a ball at me telling me I'm wrong, and I hit a ball back at you telling you you're wrong or I'm right, and it's just a tennis match that goes backwards and forwards, and it gets very wearing and tiring. And the second I put the racket down and stop needing to prove you wrong, I can then get on and just deal with my own preference. Another analogy I sometimes talk about is the entrenchment that occurs in trench warfare, and the horrible situations that happened in World War One as an example, where people were entrenched and barely moved backwards and forwards at all, more than a few yards each day, and then they'd have to go back the next day. And meanwhile, the howitzers were sending bombs and sending shells and explosives, etc., backwards and forwards over the top of them, while nothing moved in between, and the destruction and death that happened while that was going on. It's very much analogous to that, this need to win, to be right and the other to be wrong, and the stuckness of that situation and the destruction that carries on all the time in between. It is the sickness of the mind. The conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. We can just be right for us, and that can be sufficient. We can like what we like without having to dislike something else. And it is where heaven and earth are set apart. If we see heaven as being where we can just be at peace with our own choices, and earth in this context is usually portrayed as where that confusion is going on, then it is where heaven and earth are set apart, where we have to make a difference. We can't just choose one and leave the other to be just no view about it. We have to make it wrong. And I find myself in kind of day-to-day situations like this. I kind of can think that things out in the world are wrong, and criticize them, and get on Facebook or Twitter or wherever and kind of criticize what's going on, and get very much in this kind of critical place about it. But actually I'm much more at peace if I can find a place of just doing what feels right for me. So I guess an analogy that or not an analogy, a real example of this that came to me is I feel quite strongly about certain aspects of environmental issues, eco issues. I'm not necessarily saying I'm falling down, yes, in favour of the idea of climate change or not. I don't know enough about it to make that decision, but I've always felt quite strongly about plastics being overused and not getting recycled, and food waste not being effectively dealt with. And I suppose I could get very angry about that, but what I do is I just kind of try to do my own practice with recycling plastic as much as I possibly can myself, and I use my own food waste for compost. So I'm kind of doing what I feel is right for me without having to demonize other people. But there are areas where I do get very demonizing. I get very, very angry about the portrayal of issues in the media, and how I think that it's done in a very unnecessarily destructive way, where the media don't just report on things, they try to generate fear and anxiety in order to kind of create a story, kind of clickbait kind of idea. But unfortunately I think a lot of the mainstream media buy into that and try to kind of just get people to watch what they do by putting up very fear-inducing stories. And I get very angry about that. So I kind of say about that on Twitter and Facebook. But actually, what could I do instead that just feels right for me? I could explore those stories more deeply in my own interest, instead of just simply reacting to the stories that I see and getting angry and saying they're wrong and they're bad. I could just do my own kind of investigations into these things myself and find out more for myself about them, so that I'm not getting into making them wrong. I'm just getting into making what I do for me about that topic right for me. I don't have to demonize them. I can work things out for myself, but I'm not there yet. I'm struggling with that. I really get quite angry about how the media portrays various stories, so I don't feel a sense of peace. I get very, how can I put it? I get very frustrated and upset by those things. So I'm just going to finish off by saying the poem through again, just for you to consider. And if you have any views about what I've said, if it resonates with you, if you disagree with some of the things I've said, if you've got questions about them, please share them in the comments section below. Please also like the video if you do like it, and share it with other people, and subscribe to the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel. I hope to do it on some other sayings as well relating to conflict. But just to finish, I'll read it through again, and where it comes from, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. So, the perfect way is without difficulty, save that it avoids picking and choosing. Only when you stop liking and disliking will all be clearly understood. A split hair's difference, and heaven and earth are set apart. If you want to get the plain truth, be not concerned with right and wrong. The conflict between right and wrong is the sickness of the mind. From Hsin-hsin Ming by Seng-ts'an, quoted in The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.